Hi friends, Miss Janet here. Our next book that we're going to be reading and sharing is Keeper of the Lost Cities. And this book is a series, and so we're going to start with the first series and see how it goes. And if our friends who join us like it, we'll continue perhaps reading the series. So this book is by Shannon Messenger. And so let's begin. I'm going to read the first chapter, see if you're interested. 12-year-old Sophie Foster has a secret. She's a telepath, someone who hears the thoughts of everyone around her. It's a talent she's never known how to explain. Well, everything changes the day that she meets Fritz, a mysterious boy who appears out of nowhere and also reads minds. She discovers there's somewhere she does belong and that staying with her family will put her in grave danger. In the blink of an eye, Sophie is forced to leave behind everything and start a new life in a place that is vastly different from anything she has ever known. Oh my. Sophie has new rules to learn and new skills to master, and not everyone is thrilled that she has come home. There are secrets buried deep in Sophie's memory, secrets about who she really is and why she was hidden among humans that other people desperately want, would even kill for. Oh boy. So, that was the beginning of our story. Let's start with chapter 1. Miss Foster! Mr. Sweeney's nasal voice cut through Sophie's blaring music as he yanked her earbuds out by the cords. Have you decided that you're too smart to pay attention to this information? Sophie forced her eyes shut. Ugh. She tried not to wince as the bright fluorescence reflected off the vivid blue walls of the museum, amplifying the throbbing headache she was hiding. No, Mr. Sweeney, she mumbled, shrinking under the glares of her now staring classmates. She pulled her shoulder-length blonde hair around her face, wishing she could hide behind it. This was exactly the kind of attention she went out of her way to avoid. Why she wore dull colors and looked in the back, blocked by the other kids who were at least a foot taller than her. It was the only way to survive as a 12-year-old high school senior. Then perhaps you can explain why you were listening to your iPod instead of following along. Mr. Sweeney held up her earbuds like they were evidence of a crime. Though to him they probably were. He dragged Sophie's class to the Natural History Museum in Balboa Park, assuming his students would be excited about the all-day field trip. He didn't seem to realize that unless the giant dinosaur replicas came to life and started eating people, no one really cared. Sophie tugged out a loose eyelash, a nervous habit, and stared at her feet. There was no way to make Mr. Sweeney understand why she needed the music to cancel the noise. He couldn't even hear the noise. Chatter from dozens of tourists echoed off the fossil-lined walls and splashed around the cavernous room. But their mental voices were the real problem. Chatter from dozens of tourists echoed off the fossil-lined walls and splashed around the cavernous room. But their mental voices were the real problem. Did you hear that? Wow, it was their mental voices. Scattered, disconnected pieces of thoughts broadcast straight into Sophie's brain, like being in a room with hundreds of TVs blaring different shows at the same time. They sliced into her consciousness, leaving sharp pains in their wake. She was a freak. It had been her secret, her burden, since she fell and hit her head when she was 5 years old. She tried blocking the noise, trying ignoring it. Nothing helped. and she could never tell anyone they wouldn't understand. Since you've decided you're above this lecture, why don't you give it? Mr. Sweeney asked. He pointed to the enormous orange dinosaur with a duck bill in the center of the room. Explain to the class how the Lambeosaurus differs from the other dinosaurs we've studied. Sophie repressed a sigh as her mind flashed to an image of the information card in front of the display. She'd glanced at it when they entered the museum, and her photographic memory recorded every detail. As she recited the facts, Mr. Sweeney's face twisted into a scowl, and she could hear her classmates' thoughts growing increasingly sour. They weren't exactly fans of the resident child prodigy. They called her Curve Buster. She finished her answer. Mr. Sweeney grumbled something that sounded like know-it-all as he stalked off to the exhibit in the next room over. Sophie didn't follow. The thin walls separating the two rooms didn't block the noise, but they muffled it. She grabbed what little relief she could. Nice job, super freak, Garwin Chang, a boy wearing a t-shirt that said, back off, I'm gonna fart. He sneered as he shoved past her to join two of their classmates. Maybe they'll write another article about you. Child prodigy teaches class about the Lambeosaurus. Garwin was still bitter. Yale had offered her a full scholarship. His rejection letter had arrived a few weeks before. Not that Sophie was allowed to go. Her parents said it was too much attention, too much pressure, and she was too young. End of discussion. So she'd be attending the much closer, much smaller San Diego City College next year, a fact some annoying reporter found newsworthy enough to post in the local paper the day before. Child prodigy chooses City College over Ivy League. Complete with her senior photo. Her parents freaked when they found it. Freaked wasn't even a strong enough word. More than half their rules were to help Sophie avoid unnecessary attention. Front page articles were pretty much their worst nightmare. They'd even called the newspaper to complain. Well, the editor seemed as unhappy as they were. The story was run in place of an article on the arsonists terrorizing the city. And they were still trying to figure out how the mistake had happened. Bizarre fires with hot white flames and smoke that smelled like burnt sugar took priority over everything, especially a story about an unimportant little girl whose most people went out of their way to ignore, or they used to. Well, across the museum, Sophie caught sight of a tall, dark-haired boy reading yesterday's newspaper with the embarrassing black and white photo of her on the front. Then he looked up and stared straight at her. She'd never seen eyes that particular shade of blue before. Teal. Like the smooth pieces of sea glass she'd found on the beach. And they were so bright they actually glittered. Something flickered across his expression when he caught her gaze. Disappointment? Well, before she could decide what to make of it, he shrugged off the display he had been leaning against and closed the distance between them. The smile he flashed belonged on a movie screen, and Sophie's heart did a weird, fluttery thing. Is this you? He asked, pointing to the picture. Well, Sophie nodded. Feeling tongue-tied. He was probably 15 and by far the cutest boy she had ever seen. So why was he talking to her? Well, I thought so. He squinted at the picture, then back at her. I didn't realize your eyes were brown. Yeah, she said, not sure what to say. Why? No reason, he shrugged. Well, something felt off about the conversation, but she couldn't figure out what it was. And she couldn't place his accent. Kind of British, but different somehow, crisper. which bothered her, but she didn't know why. "Are you in this class?" she asked, wishing she could suck the words back as soon as they left her mouth. Of course he wasn't in her class. She had never seen him before. She wasn't used to talking to boys, especially cute boys. And it made her brain a little mushy. His perfect smile returned as he told her no. Then he pointed to the hulking greenish figure they were standing in front of, an Albertosaurus in all its giant, lizard grotesque glory. "Tell me something. Do you really think that's what they look like? It's a little absurd, isn't it?" Well, my friends, if you'd like to find out the answer to this question that he has posed, then why don't you come and join us on Tuesday, 5:30 to 6:30 on June the 20th, and we can find out. Thank you so much for reading with us, and we hope to see you then. Bye-bye.